They say a home is not a place, but a feeling. It is the steady rhythm of a sleeping family, the lingering scent of coffee in the morning, the silent accumulation of memories soaked into the very walls that shelter you. But what happens when that feeling is a lie? What happens when the home you built with your own two hands, the sanctuary you filled with love and trust, becomes the crime scene of the ultimate betrayal? For Liam Carter, the answer to that question was waiting for him in a dusty cardboard box, hidden in the suffocating stillness of his own attic. The Sunday afternoon had been unremarkable, painted in the gray, dreary tones of a coming autumn storm. His 10-year-old daughter, Chloe, had asked for an old dollhouse he had built for her years ago, and so Liam ascended the rickety pull-down stairs into the past. The air up there was thick and warm, smelling of old wood, forgotten paper, and the slow decay of time. Beams of weak sunlight cut through the grimy window, illuminating dancing motes of dust. He was looking for a specific, labeled container, but his eyes caught on something else. Tucked away behind a stack of old yearbooks was a plain box, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age, yet somehow felt new. It didn't belong to the catalog of their shared history. A strange curiosity, cold and sharp, pricked at him. He sliced the tape open with his house key. Inside, there were no childhood relics or sentimental keepsakes. There was only a thick manila folder. He lifted it out, his fingers tracing the crisp edges. The top document was a professionally printed cover sheet, and the words on it seemed to rearrange themselves, refusing to make sense. Deed of sale, and below it, the address, his address. His heart gave a painful, singular thud against his ribs. This had to be a mistake, some old document from the previous owners. But then he saw the date, printed in stark black ink at the bottom of the page, 3 weeks ago. His breath hitched. He frantically flipped to the signature page, his mind a roaring storm of denial. He saw the name of the buyer, an impersonal corporation he'd never heard of. And then he saw the sellers, Amelia Carter. Her signature, a familiar, elegant loop, and next to it, his own name, Liam Carter, scrawled in a hand that tried to imitate his, but failed miserably. It was a clumsy, insulting forgery. The air in the attic became impossibly heavy, pressing down on him, crushing the oxygen from his lungs. The distant sound of Chloe laughing downstairs felt like it was coming from another world, another lifetime. He sank to the floor, the rough wood pressing into his legs, but he felt nothing. It wasn't rage that consumed him, not yet. It was a vast, terrifying emptiness. A black hole had just opened up in the center of his life, and the man sitting in the dust of his own attic realized he was not in his home at all. He was a trespasser in the ruins of his own life. To understand the depth of the chasm that had just opened in Liam Carter's life, you must first understand the man who built the ground he stood upon. Liam was an architect, but not the kind who designed sterile glass towers that scraped the sky for corporate clients. He was a craftsman, a believer in substance over style, in foundations that were honest and true. He believed that a structure, be it a building or a family, was only as strong as its core. He found beauty in the grain of a well-sanded piece of oak, integrity in a perfectly joined corner, and peace in the quiet hum of a house filled with the people he loved. His hands, though capable of drafting the most intricate blueprints, were often calloused, dusted with sawdust, a testament to his belief that to truly create something, you had to feel it take shape. He was a man of quiet routines and simple pleasures, the first light of dawn spilling across his drafting table, the smell of freshly cut grass, the weight of his daughter Chloe's head on his shoulder as they read a book in the evening. His love for his family was the blueprint from which he designed his entire world. With Chloe, he was a patient teacher, a co-conspirator in building forts out of blankets, and the sole keeper of her fantastical bedtime stories. He saw the world's potential reflected in her bright, curious eyes, and his greatest ambition was to build a life for her that was safe, stable, and filled with a quiet, everyday magic. And then there was Amelia. To Liam, Amelia was the breathtaking facade, the sunlit atrium at the center of his life's design. He had met her a dozen years prior, a whirlwind of bright laughter and ambitious energy that seemed to perfectly complement his own steady, grounded nature. He was captivated by her charm, her ability to light up any room she entered. When he looked at her, he didn't just see a beautiful woman, he saw the keystone of his future. He believed their love was a fortress, impenetrable and enduring. He failed to see that while he was busy laying the foundation, she was dreaming of castles in the sky, built by other men. The discontent had been a subtle corrosion, happening slowly over years. It began with small comments, sighs of dissatisfaction, masked as jokes. It was in the way her eyes would glaze over when he spoke passionately about a new sustainable building material, and the way they would light up when she recounted a gala she'd attended for her marketing job. He had believed it was just the normal ebb and flow of a long-term relationship, the natural stress of modern life. He did not recognize it as the slow, deliberate withdrawal of a heart that had already packed its bags. The architect of this discontent was, in many ways, Amelia's mother, Margaret. A woman encased in a shell of expensive perfume and quiet condescension, Margaret had never truly approved of Liam. To her, he was merely the humble contractor her daughter had settled for, a man who worked with his hands instead of his connections. At family gatherings, her compliments were always double-edged swords. "It's so rustic what you've done with this place, Liam," she would say, her eyes sweeping over the hand-built cabinetry with a look that suggested it was quaint, but ultimately inadequate. She spoke of Amelia's old university friends who had married bankers and surgeons, her words dripping with the poison of comparison. Liam had always weathered these subtle attacks with a quiet dignity, believing his love and his success on his own terms were shield enough. He didn't realize that Margaret wasn't just talking to him. She was planting seeds of resentment in her daughter's mind, watering them with every visit, cultivating a garden of greed that was now in full, toxic bloom. Amelia, caught between the simple, profound love Liam offered and the glittering, hollow world her mother endorsed, had made her choice long before the house was sold. The frequent business trips, the extended weekends at her mother's house, they were not escapes from stress, but auditions for a new life, a life where she was the star, unburdened by the quiet, unassuming man who had given her everything he had. And the house was everything. It was not a property, it was a testament. Liam had bought the plot of land, a forgotten acre of overgrown woods, with the last of his savings years ago. For 2 years, he designed it, every line on the blueprint a thought for his family's future. The great room with its high, vaulted ceiling and exposed beams, designed to feel open and welcoming. The kitchen with a sprawling soapstone island, because Amelia loved to host parties. The little reading nook built into the wall of Chloe's bedroom, perfectly sized for a girl and her imagination. He had built most of it himself on weekends, and late into the summer evenings, the steady rhythm of his hammer, a love song to the family that would one day live within its walls. He remembered laying the hardwood floors, his knees aching, imagining Chloe taking her first steps across them. He remembered installing the large picture window in the living room, positioning it perfectly to frame the sunset, because Amelia had once said she loved the way the evening light looked through the trees. Every nail was a promise, every board a vow. It was his masterpiece, not of architecture, but of devotion. This was the foundation of the lie. A life that looked perfect from the outside, a marriage admired by neighbors, a home that was the envy of their friends. But Liam, the master builder, the man who could spot a structural flaw from 100 yards away, had been completely blind to the rot that was eating away at his own home from the inside out, until all that was left was a beautiful, hollow, and already sold shell. The descent from the attic was a journey across an invisible frontier, from one life into the next. Liam moved with the careful, deliberate slowness of a man navigating a minefield, his own home, now a hostile territory. Each creak of the floorboards under his feet sounded like a gunshot in the profound silence that had enveloped his mind. He carried the cardboard box, the physical proof of his world's demolition, like a bomb. His first coherent thought was not of confrontation, but of concealment. He couldn't let her see it, couldn't let her know he knew. Not yet. He bypassed the main floor, heading straight down into the basement, to his workshop. This was his sanctuary, a place Amelia rarely entered, complaining of the sawdust and the smell of wood stain. It was the only room in the house that was truly his, and now it would become his command center. He cleared a space on a high shelf behind a stack of old, unused lumber and slid the box into the darkness. Hiding it felt like a final, solemn act of severance from the man he used to be. The trusting husband was gone, locked away in that box with the forged papers. In his place stood someone else, a stranger to himself, cold and methodical. He took a few deep, ragged breaths, the familiar scent of pine and machine oil, doing little to calm the Arctic winter in his soul. He had to go back upstairs. He had to look at his wife, at his daughter, and pretend that the world had not just ended. That evening was a masterclass in silent torment. Liam sat at the dinner table he had built with his own hands, across from the woman who had sold it out from under him, and he smiled. He listened as Amelia recounted a story about a difficult client at her marketing firm, her words flowing with their usual animated grace. He watched the way she laughed, a sound that had once been music to him, but now sounded like shattering glass. Every familiar gesture, every glance, was now filtered through the horrifying lens of his new knowledge. He saw the calculation behind her eyes, the subtle tension in her jaw. Was she thinking about the money? About her lover? Was she looking at him right now, pitying his ignorance? The food tasted like ash in his mouth. When she reached across the table to affectionately brush a crumb from his shirt, her touch felt like a burn. He had to physically restrain himself from recoiling. His daughter, Chloe, blissfully unaware, chattered on about her day at school, her innocent voice a painful counterpoint to the silent, screaming chaos in Liam's head. He clung to her words, focusing on the pure, simple reality of her presence. She was the reason he had to keep smiling, the reason he had to feign normality. She was the reason he couldn't just explode and shatter their lives into a million irreparable pieces. For her, he had to be smarter, he had to be patient, he had to be a predator. He waited 2 days. 2 days of watching, listening, and feeling the icy resolve harden within him. He needed to hear her lie to his face. He needed the confirmation, the final, undeniable proof that the Amelia he loved was a phantom, and this woman was a cunning imposter. He chose his moment carefully. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of forgettable, domestic night that had once defined their life together. Chloe was upstairs, finishing her homework. Amelia was in the kitchen, wiping down the soapstone countertops, and Liam was leaning against the doorframe, nursing a glass of water. The quiet of the house was a blank canvas on which he would paint the first scene of his new reality. He let the silence stretch for a moment, then spoke, his voice calibrated to a perfect, casual pitch. "Hey, honey," he began, watching her reflection in the dark kitchen window. "I was just going through some of our finances online. You know, with interest rates being what they are, I was thinking we could look into refinancing the mortgage. Maybe pull some cash out to finally do that big kitchen upgrade you've been talking about." He had added the last part deliberately, a small, cruel test. He was dangling a future he knew she had no intention of sharing, a future in a house that, to her, was already just a liquidated asset. The reaction was almost imperceptible, but to Liam's hyper-aware senses, it was a symphony of deceit. For a fraction of a second, her hand paused its circular motion on the counter. Her shoulders tensed. He saw her eyes, in the reflection, widen almost invisibly before the mask snapped back into place. She turned to him, a brilliant smile instantly appearing on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those remained cold, calculating. "Oh, that's a great idea, sweetie," she chirped, her voice a little too bright. "But the paperwork? God, who knows?" She let out a light, theatrical laugh. "You know how things are. I think the main folder is in the filing cabinet in the study. Or, wait, did we move it to the safe deposit box at the bank last year? I feel like we did, for safekeeping." She tapped a finger to her chin, a perfect portrait of a slightly flustered, well-meaning wife. "Honestly, Liam, with all your blueprints and project files piled everywhere, it could be buried under a mountain of your stuff. Why don't you check the study first?" It was a masterful performance. In less than 30 seconds, she had feigned agreement, pleaded ignorance, offered multiple false locations, and subtly shifted the blame of the missing documents onto his own supposed disorganization. An innocent person would have said, "I don't know, let's look for it together." Amelia had built a fortress of lies around a simple question. Liam just nodded slowly, the ghost of a smile on his face. "You're probably right," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I'll take a look this weekend." He turned and walked away, not wanting her to see the look in his eyes. He had the only answer he needed. The line had been drawn. He was not dealing with a wife who had made a terrible mistake. He was dealing with an enemy who was sleeping in his bed. The time for questions was over. The time for answers, gathered his own way, had just begun. The lie in the kitchen did not break Liam. It forged him. In the smoldering ruins of his marriage, a new kind of man was born, one he barely recognized. The grief, the white-hot rage, the suffocating sense of betrayal, these emotions were still there, a constant, low-frequency hum beneath the surface. But they were no longer in control. They were being compacted, compressed by a will of terrifying clarity, transformed from a chaotic fire into a focused blue flame. He understood now that a direct confrontation, a screaming match in the heart of their beautiful stolen home, would be a fool's errand. It would be an emotional release, yes, but it would also be a tactical suicide. It would give Amelia and her accomplices the one thing they needed, a warning. They would have time to cover their tracks, to hide the money, to craft a narrative casting him as the unstable, paranoid husband. They would use his pain against him, turning his righteous anger into a weapon to destroy him further, perhaps even to take Chloe from him. No. That was their way of fighting with chaos and deception. He would fight his way, as an architect, with a plan, with precision, and with a foundation of undeniable truth. This would not be a messy demolition. This would be a meticulous, painstaking deconstruction of the life she had built on lies. He knew he couldn't draft these new blueprints alone. He needed a different kind of contractor, a specialist in the law's intricate frameworks. More than that, he needed someone he could trust with the shattered pieces of his life. There was only one name in his mind, David Chen. They had been roommates in college, an unlikely pairing of the pragmatic law student and the artistic architect in training. Their friendship was a structure built to last, founded on late-night debates, shared ambitions, and an unshakable loyalty. David had become one of the sharpest fraud and property lawyers in the state, his mind a steel trap for details and loopholes. The next morning, Liam sat in his truck in a deserted corner of a supermarket parking lot, the engine off, the phone feeling unnaturally heavy in his hand. He rehearsed the words, needing to sound urgent but not hysterical. When David answered, his voice warm and familiar, Liam felt the first crack in his own icy composure. "Dave, it's Liam," he said, his voice lower than usual. "Listen, I'm in trouble. The kind I can't talk about over the phone. I need to see you. Today." There was no hesitation on the other end. "Where and when, my friend? I'll clear my schedule." They met that afternoon in a dimly lit bar 20 miles out of town, a place of worn leather booths and the smell of stale beer, where no one would know their faces. The anonymity was a comfort. Liam had brought a briefcase. He didn't order a drink, just a glass of water. For the first time since he'd descended from the attic, he allowed the story to be told. He laid it all out, not with tears or raised emotions, but with the flat, dispassionate tone of a man reading a damage report. He spoke of the box, the deed, the forged signature, and Amelia's flawless performance in the kitchen. He then opened the briefcase and slid a stack of neatly made photocopies across the sticky table. David listened without interruption, his friendly, relaxed demeanor slowly evaporating, replaced by a mask of intense, professional focus. He picked up the copy of the signature page, his eyes narrowing, tracing the clumsy imitation of his friend's name. The lawyer in him was taking over, but the anger in his clenched jaw was that of a loyal friend. When Liam finished, David was silent for a full minute, his gaze fixed on the documents. Finally, he looked up, and his eyes were hard. "This is not just an infidelity, Liam," he said, his voice low and firm. "This is a criminal conspiracy. We're talking about multiple felonies. Grand larceny, forgery, wire fraud. They didn't just break your heart, they've set a legal time bomb for themselves." He began asking a series of sharp, incisive questions. "Did you touch the original documents after you found them? Do you have sole access to the place where they're hidden? Are your personal and financial accounts separate from hers? Has she been talking about money more than usual? Any new, expensive purchases? Then came the advice that would become Liam's new creed. David leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. From this moment forward, you are a ghost in your own life. You are the loving, devoted, slightly clueless husband she believes you to be. You go to work, you play with Chloe, you ask Amelia about her day, and you listen to her lies with a smile. You do not, under any circumstances, let her know that anything is wrong. She is at her most dangerous right now because she thinks she's gotten away with it. Her guard is down. That is our single biggest advantage. He mapped out the strategy. They needed more than the forged deed. They needed to follow the money, to find out where the proceeds of the sale went. They needed to identify the people behind the shell company. They needed to prove intent, to prove that this was a premeditated act of fraud, not a desperate mistake. You're going to become the greatest actor of your life, David continued. You will live and breathe this role. Meanwhile, I'll start the legal groundwork. I'll file a motion to begin discovery on Horizon Properties LLC under a different pretext, so it won't raise red flags. Your job, Liam, is to be my eyes and ears inside that house. Observe. Document everything. Every strange phone call she takes, every time she leaves the house at an odd hour, every receipt you find. Keep a journal. Be meticulous. Be patient. As Liam listened, he felt a strange transformation taking place. The chaotic despair that had threatened to drown him was receding, replaced by a powerful sense of purpose. David was giving him a framework, a blueprint. All his life, Liam had created things. He had taken empty spaces and given them form, function, and beauty. He built things to shelter people, to bring them together. Now, he was being asked to apply his skills to a different kind of architecture, the architecture of justice. He would approach this task with the same precision he would any building project. He would survey the landscape of her lies, identify the structural weaknesses in her story, and gather the evidence piece by piece, like stone and timber. He wouldn't lash out with a wrecking ball. He would quietly and methodically remove every nail, every rivet, every load-bearing beam of her deceit, until the entire rotten structure collapsed under the undeniable weight of the truth. He looked at his friend across the table, the first ally in his silent war. "Okay," Liam said, his voice steady for the first time in days. "Show me the blueprints." The silent architect had just broken ground on his final project. The weeks that followed were a descent into a surreal double life. To the outside world, and even within the walls of his own home, Liam Carter remained the steady, unassuming husband and father. He discussed Chloe's school projects, commented on the weather, and feigned interest in Amelia's fabricated work stories. He was a ghost at his own dinner table, a polite and smiling phantom whose real consciousness was miles away, deep in the silent, strategic war he was now waging. His workshop in the basement, once a place of creative joy, became his war room. Every night, after the house fell silent, he would descend into its cool, quiet solitude. Under the stark glow of a single architect's lamp, he would meticulously document every detail of Amelia's behavior, every inconsistency in her stories, every phone call she took in a hushed voice as she walked into another room. He was living a life of extreme compartmentalization, the loving father upstairs and the cold, calculating investigator down below. While he managed the front lines of domestic espionage, David Chen began the methodical assault on the legal front. With the precision of a surgeon, David started probing the corporate entity known as Horizon Properties LLC. He couldn't attack it directly without tipping their hand, so he used a series of clever, indirect legal maneuvers, filing discovery motions related to a zoning dispute on an adjacent property, issuing subpoenas for public records under the guise of a different case. It was a slow, painstaking process of pulling at loose threads, designed to unravel the anonymous fabric of the Shell Corporation without alerting the spiders at the center of the web. After 3 weeks of meticulous legal digging, the first thread unraveled. A name, buried deep within a series of nested incorporation documents filed out of state. Mark Thorne. The name landed like a stone in Liam's gut. Mark Thorne wasn't just a stranger. He was a minor celebrity in the local real estate scene. A man known for his flashy suits, his predatory business practices, and his face plastered on for sale signs in the county's most affluent neighborhoods. Liam had seen him at fundraisers and galas that Amelia had insisted they attend, a shark gliding through a sea of polite society, always surrounded by a coterie of investors and admirers. He remembered the slick, confident smile, the overly firm handshake. He had dismissed him then as just another empty suit. Now, he saw him for what he was, the architect of his ruin. The connection was both horrifying and logical. This wasn't a random act of deception. This was a targeted operation, and Amelia hadn't just been a participant. She had delivered her husband, her family, directly into the hands of a known predator. The question was no longer just what they did, but why? What had Mark offered her that was worth the price of her husband's entire world? David's advice was stark. A name wasn't enough. They needed a direct link between Mark and Amelia, something more concrete than suspicion. Professional surveillance was an option, but it was expensive and carried the risk of exposure. Liam knew he couldn't wait. He needed to see it for himself, to understand the true shape of the betrayal. That night, sitting in his truck in the sterile, fluorescent glare of a 24-hour electronics store parking lot, he crossed a personal Rubicon. In his hand was a small, black magnetic box, no bigger than a pack of matches, a high-end GPS tracker. The act of buying it had made him feel like a criminal, a sickness churning in his stomach. This was something he never imagined himself capable of, a violation of the very trust he once held sacred. But the woman he was about to track was not the woman he had married. The vows had already been broken, the trust had been incinerated. He was merely documenting the wreckage. Later, in the dead of night, he crept into his own garage. The air was cold, silent, except for the frantic pounding of his own heart. He knelt on the concrete floor, the tracker feeling alien and illicit in his hand, and attached it to the undercarriage of Amelia's expensive sedan. As the magnet clicked firmly into place, he felt a profound and irreversible shift within himself. There was no going back. He had just entered the shadows, and he knew he would not emerge the same man. The tracker data began to paint a map of Amelia's secret life. For the first few days, the patterns were routine, almost disappointingly normal. Her office, the yoga studio, the grocery store, her mother's gated community. But then, the anomalies began to appear. 2 or 3 times a week, there was a 90-minute stop around lunchtime at an intimate, expensive bistro downtown. More disturbingly, there were frequent visits, often lasting for several hours in the late afternoon, to a luxury high-rise condominium building on the other side of town, a place where he knew she had no friends or business. The digital breadcrumbs were leading him somewhere dark, and he knew he had to follow. One Thursday afternoon, after receiving a notification that her car had been stationary at the bistro for over an hour, Liam acted on an impulse he couldn't suppress. He told his secretary he had a last-minute site inspection and drove. He parked across the street, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, his hands gripping the steering wheel, and then he saw them. Through the restaurant's large plate glass window, at a secluded corner table, sat Amelia. She was laughing, her head tilted back, her hair catching the light. And sitting across from her, leaning in close, his hand possessively covering hers on the table, was Mark Thorne. The sight was a physical blow. It knocked the air from his lungs, a silent, concussive force that left him dizzy and nauseous. It was one thing to see a name on a piece of paper, to connect the dots in the abstract. It was another thing entirely to witness the casual intimacy, the shared laughter, the proprietary touch. He saw in that single gesture the entire, sordid history of their conspiracy. This wasn't just a business arrangement. This was an affair. The knowledge landed not with a bang, but with a quiet, sickening finality. He sat in his truck for a long time, the engine off, watching them until they rose to leave. He saw Mark place a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of ownership. All the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture of breathtaking cruelty. The pain was immense, a deep, heart-tearing agony that threatened to rip his carefully constructed composure to shreds. But beneath the pain, something else was happening. The fire of his anger was being cooled and compressed, not extinguished. It was being forged into something harder, colder, and infinitely more durable: tempered steel. The mission was no longer just about justice or money. It was about a reckoning. Witnessing the affair was like a lightning strike, illuminating the entire treacherous landscape of his wife's deceit. Liam now understood that the sale of the house was not the primary goal. It was merely the financing for a new life, a life with Mark Thorne. The theft of his home was inextricably woven with the theft of his marriage. He was not the victim of two separate betrayals, but of one singular monstrous conspiracy. This realization pushed him further into the cold calculus of his new existence. He had visual proof of where Amelia went and who she met. But that was only the surface. The GPS tracker was a map, but he needed to hear the conversations of the cartographers. He needed to understand the language of their treason, to hear the plans spoken in their own voices. He needed to know the full extent of the conspiracy, to identify every single person who had a hand in the demolition of his life. To do that, he would have to cross a final, terrible line, one that would take him from being a passive observer to an active eavesdropper on the life he once shared. The research felt sordid and shameful. He spent hours deep into the night in his workshop, his laptop screen casting a pale, ghostly light on his face as he navigated the dark corners of the internet, learning about surveillance software and spyware. Each click felt like a moral compromise, pulling him deeper into a world of paranoia and deceit that was once completely alien to him. He was an architect, a builder of transparent, light-filled spaces. Now, he was planning to create a secret, one-way window into his wife's most private communications. The justification for this profound violation was the only thing that kept him going: Chloe. He wasn't just a wronged husband seeking revenge. He was a father protecting his child from a conspiracy of which she was the ultimate innocent victim. He finally chose a sophisticated software, one that was undetectable and would upload its data to a secure, encrypted cloud account only he could access. The opportunity to install it came on a Saturday morning. It was a small, terrifying window of time. Amelia had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to take a long shower. His heart hammered against his ribs, his hands slick with a cold sweat as he picked up the device. It felt like holding a snake. The house was quiet except for the distant sound of the running shower and the frantic thumping in his own ears. With shaking fingers, he followed the instructions, the download bar on the screen crawling forward with agonizing slowness. Every second felt like an hour. He imagined her stepping out of the shower, walking down the stairs, catching him in the act. But she didn't. The installation completed. He deleted the traces, placed the phone back on the counter exactly as it had been, and walked away, his whole body trembling. The deed was done. He had bugged his own wife's phone. The first few days of listening were a strange and voyeuristic hell. He would sit in his workshop late at night, headphones on, sifting through the day's captured calls and messages. Much of it was mundane chatter with her friends, coordinating yoga classes, and complaining about work. Each normal conversation felt like a fresh stab of guilt. But beneath the surface of normalcy, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The most frequent and lengthy calls were not to Mark Thorne, but to her mother, Margaret. They spoke almost every day, sometimes multiple times. Their conversations were often guarded, filled with coded language and inside references, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the tone of co-conspirators. Liam had always known Margaret viewed him with a thinly veiled disdain, but he had dismissed it as simple snobbery. He had never imagined it could be something so much darker, so venomous. He was listening to the slow drip of poison, and he braced himself for the flood he knew was coming. It came on a Wednesday evening. The recording was from a call Amelia had made from her car after leaving her office. Liam pressed play, and the next 15 minutes froze his soul. The conversation began with Amelia, her voice fraught with anxiety. "He almost found out, Mom," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "He was asking about our finances, about refinancing the house. I had to lie. I don't know if he bought it." Liam's blood ran cold. She was talking about their conversation in the kitchen. Then, Margaret's voice came through the headphones, not with maternal comfort, but with the icy calm of a seasoned strategist. "Amelia, get a hold of yourself," Margaret chided, her tone sharp. "Panicking is how you make mistakes. You did the right thing. You lied. Now you stick to that lie. Liam is a simple man. He's emotional. He thinks with his heart, which is why he has never been and will never be good enough for you." Liam felt his breath catch in his throat. Margaret continued, her voice dripping with condescension. "Mark is a man of vision, of action. He is giving you the life you deserve, the life I always wanted for you. Liam was just a stepping stone, darling. A safe, boring place to wait until the real opportunity came along. You've done the hard part. Don't lose your nerve now." Then the conversation turned practical, and even more damning. Amelia worried about the money, about the transfer being traced. Margaret was the one with the answers. "Mark's lawyers have handled everything," she said dismissively. "The money is already moving through 2 different offshore accounts. By the time it gets to the project investment fund, it will be completely clean. I told you, they are professionals. All you need to do is keep playing the part of the loving wife for a little while longer." But the final blow, the one that shattered the last vestiges of Liam's humanity, was when they spoke of his daughter. "And it's for Chloe's own good," Amelia said, as if trying to convince herself. Margaret readily agreed. "Of course, at Island. Do you want her growing up in a world of sawdust and blueprints, or a world of opportunity, of the best schools, of European vacations? You're securing her future, Amelia. Her father could never give her that." Liam tore the headphones from his ears, a silent scream trapped in his chest. He sat there in the darkness of his workshop, the chilling echo of their voices still ringing in his head. The betrayal was absolute. It was not a mistake. It was not a lapse in judgment. It was a cold, calculated, multi-generational plot orchestrated by the one person he believed, despite her flaws, loved her daughter and grandchild. His wife was a traitor, his mother-in-law a monster, and they had used the language of love and motherhood to justify the utter destruction of his life. The pain of the affair had been a fire. This was the void. An absolute zero where all warmth, all love, all hope for the woman he had married ceased to exist. He now saw the full scope of the battlefield. It was not just him against Amelia and her lover. It was him against them all. And in that frozen, silent darkness, the architect made a final, unbreakable vow. He would not just seek justice, he would seek annihilation. He would bring their entire corrupt world crashing down around them, and he would do it with the same meticulous care with which he had once built a home for the very people who were now his sworn enemies. The damning recordings of Amelia and her mother were the emotional centerpiece of the conspiracy, a direct insight into the black hearts of the women who had betrayed him. When Liam played the audio for David in the sterile quiet of his law office, his friend sat in stunned silence, his face a mask of cold fury. This evidence was a prosecutor's dream, a confession of intent and malice delivered in the conspirators' own voices. They now had a rock-solid case for fraud, but as they mapped out the known facts on a large whiteboard, a single, glaring inconsistency remained, a detail so counterintuitive it felt like a deliberate taunt. The sale price, Liam's custom-built home, situated on a prime acre of land in a desirable suburb, should have sold for a premium. Yet, the forged documents showed a price that was a good 20% below an honest market appraisal. For people driven by such profound greed, it made no sense. Why would Mark Thorne, a notoriously shrewd developer, leave money on the table? Why would Amelia, so desperate for a life of luxury, agree to sell her golden goose for a fraction of its worth? The question hung in the air between the two men, a loose thread that suggested the tapestry of the crime was far larger and more complex than they had imagined. It was David who articulated the paradigm shift. He stood back from the whiteboard, tapping a pen against his chin. "We're thinking like homeowners, Liam," he said, his voice sharp with dawning insight. "We're thinking about kitchen finishes and school districts. Mark Thorne doesn't think like that. He's a developer. He doesn't buy houses, he buys parcels. He buys futures. He didn't buy your house, my friend. He bought the dirt it's sitting on. The question isn't why he paid so little for the house. The question is, what does he know about the land that we don't? This simple reframing of the problem changed everything. Their focus pivoted from the personal violation of the home to the impersonal, strategic value of the property. They had to stop looking at the past and start investigating the future. Their new investigation began not in bank records or phone logs, but in the driest, most mundane archives of civic life, the city planning department. They launched a two-pronged attack on the bureaucracy. David, with his legal authority, began filing a series of Broad Freedom of Information Act requests for all zoning variance applications, infrastructure proposals, and traffic studies related to their district for the past 18 months. Meanwhile, Liam, leveraging his professional understanding of municipal codes and development processes, spent his nights online, scrolling through thousands of pages of public records, council meeting minutes, and budget proposals. It was a grueling, soul-crushing search for a needle in a bureaucratic haystack. The documents were dense with technical jargon and legal boilerplate, designed to be impenetrable to the average citizen. But Liam was not an average citizen. He was an architect. His mind was trained to see the structure beneath the surface, to recognize the logic in a complex system. He began to notice things a casual observer would miss: a small budget allocation for a hydrological survey in a nearby creek, a proposal to widen a two-lane road a mile away, a subtle change in the city's long-term utility easement plans. Individually, these details were meaningless. But as Liam began to plot them on a large map in his workshop, a faint pattern began to emerge. The seemingly random civic improvements were all converging, like arteries leading to a single, unseen heart, and his neighborhood, his street, his own property was at the very center of it all. The breakthrough came not from a map or a blueprint, but from a single line of text buried on page 412 of the annex to the municipal budget proposal. It was an entry for a $50,000 allocation for a preliminary feasibility study for the North Ridge Commercial Corridor project. North Ridge. That was the official name of his residential subdivision. There had been no public announcement, no discussion of such a project. This was a ghost, a whisper in the machine. Armed with this specific project name, David was able to exert more targeted pressure. He called in a favor with a contact at the county clerk's office, a woman he had helped with a pro bono case years ago. He asked her to do a deep, internal search for any and all documents related to that project. 2 days later, an anonymous manila envelope arrived at David's office. Inside was a set of preliminary planning documents, stamped confidential, internal review only. David called Liam immediately. "Get down here," he said, his voice tight with a mixture of excitement and dread. "You need to see this." Liam spread the documents out on David's large conference table. It was a master plan, a secret, sweeping vision for the future of his town. The plan proposed a complete rezoning of a 2-square-mile residential area, his entire neighborhood, to create a high-end, mixed-use commercial development. They weren't just planning to build a new strip mall. They were planning to build a new downtown, complete with luxury retail, corporate office towers, and multi-story condominium buildings. And then he saw it. On the master blueprint, a large section of land was outlined in red, marked as Phase 1 anchor. This parcel was the linchpin, the single most critical piece of real estate needed to kickstart the entire multi-billion-dollar project. That red outline traced the exact property lines of his home. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle slammed into place. Mark Thorne, through his corrupt connections inside the city government, had known about this confidential plan all along. His seduction of Amelia, his entire relationship with her, had been nothing more than a strategic corporate acquisition strategy. He needed to secure that specific piece of land quietly, cheaply, before the rezoning was announced and its value exploded by a factor of 50 or 100. The lowball offer wasn't a mistake. It was a masterstroke of predatory capitalism, a cash offer designed for a quick, private sale that would stay off the radar. They weren't just stealing his $500,000 home. They were stealing a $20 million future. Liam stared at the map, at the red box that had once contained his life. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the greed left him speechless. He was not a husband to be betrayed, but an obstacle to be removed. He was a line item on a budget, a pesky homeowner standing in the way of a massive profit margin, and in that moment, his personal quest for justice was transformed. This was no longer just about his family, his house, his pain. This was about the rot. The systemic corruption that allowed men like Mark Thorne to treat people's lives like assets to be liquidated. His mission was now clear, cold, and absolute. He would not just expose a cheating wife and her lover, he would burn their entire corrupt empire to the ground. With the full, breathtaking scope of the conspiracy now laid bare, the emotional storm within Liam finally subsided, leaving behind a silence as vast and cold as a winter landscape. The pain was still there, a permanent geological feature of his new reality, but it no longer drove him. It was simply the ground upon which he now stood. He and David met, not as a victim and his lawyer, but as two strategists mapping out the final phase of a campaign. On the large whiteboard in David's office, they erased the questions and the theories. In their place, they created a new list, a final punch list of the tangible, irrefutable evidence they would need to build a case so overwhelmingly powerful that it could not be denied, negotiated, or escaped. This was no longer just about getting justice in a courtroom. Liam's vision was grander and colder. He wanted to build a prison of truth around Amelia, Mark, and Margaret, a structure so perfectly designed that the entire world could see them for exactly what they were. The architect was ready to build his final masterpiece. Their first priority was to give the affair a physical form. The GPS data and Liam's own fleeting, painful sighting were enough for him, but not for a judge or for the court of public opinion. They needed clear, undeniable photographic and video evidence. For this, they needed a professional. David made a call to a private investigator he had used on other complex fraud cases, a discreet, ex-homicide detective named Frank Miller. Frank was a man of few words and methodical habits who viewed human drama with the weary dispassion of someone who had seen it all. Liam met him in a quiet coffee shop, providing him with photos of Amelia and Mark, their schedules, and the GPS data on their movements. Frank listened, his eyes missing nothing, and simply nodded. "I'll be a ghost," he promised. And he was. Over the next 3 weeks, Frank delivered a steady stream of evidence to a secure online Dropbox. The photos were clinically brutal. There was Amelia and Mark, kissing in the dimly lit concrete of an underground parking garage. There they were, holding hands across a candlelit dinner table, their faces alight with a shared, secret joy. There was a high-resolution shot of them using a key to enter the luxury condominium, the same one from the GPS data, confirming it as their sanctuary. The final report included hotel receipts, paid for in cash, and a short video clip, taken with a long lens camera, from an adjacent building, showing them sharing a bottle of wine on the condo's balcony, silhouetted against the city lights. Liam looked at each image with a detached, analytical coldness. The man who would have been shattered by these pictures was gone. He saw them now only as exhibits, carefully labeled pieces of his arsenal. Each photo was another brick in the wall of their prison. While Frank was documenting the personal betrayal, David was relentlessly attacking the financial front. Armed with a court order granted on the pretext of a preliminary divorce filing a necessary move to gain legal standing, David issued a barrage of subpoenas. He targeted the title company that handled the fraudulent sale, the bank that held the mortgage, and the financial institution where the shell corporation, Horizon Properties LLC, had its account. The money trail was a complex serpent's path, designed to be untraceable. David and a forensic accountant he hired spent weeks untangling it. They found the initial payment from Mark's company for the sale of the house. From there, the full sum was wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, where it was split. A significant portion was then funneled back into the United States, deposited into a newly created joint savings account under the names of Amelia Carter and Mark Thorne. It was a classic, arrogant money laundering scheme, and they had documented every step. They now had a direct, unbroken line connecting the theft of Liam's home to the personal enrichment of his wife and her lover. This was the steel framework of their case. The next piece of the puzzle was the most crucial: the forgery. Liam's word that the signature was not his was not enough. They needed a scientific certainty that would be unshakable in court. David enlisted the services of a nationally recognized forensic document examiner, a woman who had testified in federal cases. The challenge was providing her with untainted contemporary examples of Liam's genuine signature, known as exemplars, without raising Amelia's suspicions. Liam spent a tense week carefully gathering them. He found a signed contract for a small project tucked away in his home office. He retrieved a canceled check from his car's glove compartment. He even went to his bank to request a copy of his original signature card from when he opened his account years ago. He delivered the documents to David, who forwarded them to the examiner along with a high-quality scan of the forged deed. 2 weeks later, the report arrived. It was a 12-page clinical autopsy of the lie. The examiner's conclusion was unequivocal. Using magnification, light analysis, and digital overlays, she had identified numerous indicators of conscious simulation. She noted the unnatural pen lifts, the microscopic hesitations in the strokes, the differences in pressure and slant that were inconsistent with the fluid, natural rhythm of Liam's genuine signature. The report concluded, "There is conclusive evidence that the signature of Liam Carter on the document in question was not written by the provider of the known exemplar signatures. It was the scientific nail in the coffin." Finally, Liam revisited the audio recordings. He spent an entire night in his workshop, listening to the voices of his wife and mother-in-law one last time. He was no longer listening with the ears of a heartbroken husband, but with the cold, precise ear of an editor. He isolated the most incriminating segments, the sound bites of pure, unadulterated malice. Margaret's voice, cold and clear, advising her daughter on how to manage him. Amelia's voice, admitting her fear of being caught after he'd asked about refinancing. Their shared, dismissive laughter as they talked about his simple nature. Their chilling discussion of how this was all for Chloe's future. He had the key clips professionally transcribed and time-stamped. Seeing their poisonous words typed out in stark black and white on the page gave them a new, terrifying permanence. They were no longer just sounds, they were testimony. 2 months after he had first sat on the dusty floor of his attic, a broken man, Liam now stood with David in his conference room. The evidence was spread out before them like a general's battle map. The glossy, incriminating photos from the private investigator. The complex flowcharts tracing the path of the stolen money. The forensic examiner's damning scientific report. The cold, typed transcripts of his wife's and mother-in-law's treachery. The weapon of truth was fully assembled. Every component had been tested, every weakness eliminated. It was a perfect machine of destruction. Now, all that was left was to choose the perfect time and place for its detonation. With the arsenal of truth fully assembled, the question of strategy became paramount. David, ever the pragmatist, laid out the conventional path of attack. They would file a comprehensive civil lawsuit, attaching every piece of evidence. This would be followed by a criminal complaint filed with the district attorney's office. It was the logical, by-the-book approach, a slow and methodical legal siege. But as Liam looked at the mountain of evidence, the cold photos, the damning reports, the chilling transcripts, he knew that a quiet, protracted legal battle would not be enough. It would be a war fought in the sterile silence of courtrooms and law offices, a process that would allow his enemies to do what they did best: lie, spin, and manipulate. They would hire expensive lawyers to create doubt, to smear his character, to bury the truth under an avalanche of motions and delays. A legal victory was likely, but it would be a hollow one if they were allowed to retreat into the shadows, their reputations bruised but intact. He needed more than justice. He needed a reckoning. He needed to destroy the one thing they held even more dear than money: their public facade, their carefully curated image of success and respectability. He needed a stage, an audience, and a single, devastating moment of inescapable truth. The stage presented itself a week later, delivered in a thick, cream-colored envelope with his name elegantly calligraphed on the front. It was an invitation to Margaret's 65th birthday party. The event was to be a lavish gala held at her sprawling, ostentatious estate, a testament to the wealth and status she so worshipped. The guest list, Liam knew, would be a who's who of their affluent community: bankers, doctors, local politicians, and, most importantly, the circle of wealthy investors and business partners that formed the orbit of Mark Thorne's universe. Amelia presented the invitation to him one evening, her expression a practiced mask of weary sympathy. "I know this is terribly awkward, Liam," she said, avoiding his eyes, "but Mother is insisting. We have to think of Chloe, to maintain some semblance of a normal family for her through all of this." Her words, meant to manipulate him, were instead a gift. She was handing him the perfect cover, the perfect reason to be at the heart of their world on their most celebrated night. He looked at the invitation, at the gilded, swirling font, and saw not a social obligation, but a battlefield of his own choosing. He played his part perfectly, feigning reluctance. "I don't know, Amelia," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "But you're right. For Chloe, I'll be there." She seemed relieved, blind to the cold, predatory gleam in his eyes. He was not just accepting an invitation, he was accepting their unconditional surrender. In the 2 weeks leading up to the party, Liam became a different kind of architect. His workshop was no longer a war room for gathering intelligence, but a production studio for designing the instrument of its delivery. He storyboarded his presentation with the same meticulous precision he would use for a multi-million-dollar building proposal. This would be his magnum opus, the final, devastating reveal. He spent hours editing the audio from his wife's phone, weaving together the most damning sound bites into a chilling narrative of their conspiracy. He took the forensic examiner's dry, technical report on the forgery and turned it into a series of clear, powerful graphics showing his real signature side by side with the clumsy fake, the expert's damning conclusions highlighted in bold red text. He sequenced the private investigator's photos to tell a story, from the first clandestine lunch to the intimate kiss in the parking garage. He created simple, stark slides displaying the complex web of bank transfers, using arrows to show the serpent's path of the money from his home to their secret account. He compiled it all into a single, seamless multimedia presentation, timed to the second. It began with a beautiful, sun-drenched photo of the house he had built. It would end with the complete and utter demolition of the lives of those who had stolen it. The most critical part of the plan was the technical execution. A man walking into a party and trying to plug a laptop into a sound system would be stopped. He needed control. He needed an inside track. His first step was to find out who was handling the audio visuals for the event. A quick, discreet inquiry revealed Margaret had hired a local company, Elegant Events AV. Liam's architectural firm had used freelancers from this same company for their own presentations. He found a name in his records, a young, talented, and perpetually underpaid technician named Leo. Liam contacted Leo, not as Liam Carter the wronged husband, but as Mr. Carter the architect, offering him a highly paid, cash-in-hand, private consulting gig. The job, he explained, was simple. He was preparing a surprise tribute video for his mother-in-law, and he needed someone on the inside at the party to ensure it ran smoothly. He needed Leo to get a job on the official AV crew for the night, an easy task for a skilled freelancer, and to make sure a secondary, discrete input for Liam's laptop was available and tested on the main projection system. He provided Leo with a generous cash advance for his time and discretion. Leo, thrilled at the lucrative and simple request, readily agreed. The trap was now wired. He had his own technician on the inside, a man who believed he was helping with a heartwarming family surprise, who would, at Liam's signal, be able to switch the source feed in an instant. On the evening of the party, a profound and chilling calm settled over Liam. He stood before the mirror in his bedroom, adjusting the knot on a simple, dark tie. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his appearance immaculate. He looked like a man attending a celebration, but his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of a soldier before a battle, a demolitions expert before a controlled blast. There was no anger, no fear, no sadness. There was only a singular, crystalline focus. Amelia came into the room, already dressed in a stunning, expensive gown. "You look nice," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice, as if she expected him to show up looking broken and defeated. "Let's just try to be civil tonight, for everyone's sake." Liam simply nodded, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "Of course," he said, his voice even. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." He walked downstairs to where Chloe was waiting, a beautiful little girl in a party dress, blissfully unaware of the cataclysm that was about to unfold. He was her father, and his final act of building a safe world for her would be to first burn the corrupt one to the ground. The stage was set. The audience of the arrogant and the complicit was arriving, and the silent architect, with his blueprint for destruction loaded onto a small, powerful laptop, was ready to make his presentation. Margaret's estate was a monument to ostentatious wealth, a sprawling mansion where taste had been sacrificed at the altar of expense. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and hothouse flowers. A string quartet played softly in a marble-floored foyer, their delicate music drowned out by the self-congratulatory chatter of the 1%. Champagne flowed from fountains, and guests dripped with jewels that glittered under the light of colossal crystal chandeliers. To Liam, it was not a party, it was a gilded cage, and he was the ghost haunting the festivities. He moved through the crowds with a serene and unnerving calm, a polite smile fixed on his face, his eyes taking in the final scene of the play he had so carefully orchestrated. He saw them all, the architects of his pain, basking in their moment of triumph. Mark Thorne was holding court near the bar, a circle of silver-haired investors hanging on his every word, their conversation punctuated by booming, confident laughter. Amelia, a vision in a shimmering emerald gown, glided through the room, the perfect hostess, her beauty, a dazzling and deceptive veneer. And at the center of it all was Margaret, the birthday queen on her throne, accepting compliments and air kisses, her face alight with the smug satisfaction of a woman who believed she had won at life. Liam felt nothing. No anger, no jealousy, not even a whisper of the love he once felt. He was utterly detached, a surgeon observing a diseased organism just before making the first incision. Across the grand ballroom, he made brief eye contact with Leo, his technician, who was dressed in the black uniform of the AV crew. Leo gave him a single, subtle nod. The stage was set. An hour into the gala, the music softened, and a gentle spotlight fell on a small, elegantly decorated podium. Margaret, holding a glass of champagne, stepped into the light. The room fell into a respectful hush. She began her speech, her voice smooth and practiced, a symphony of false modesty and immense self-regard. She thanked her dearest friends for sharing this milestone with her. She spoke of her journey, of her business acumen, of the joy of seeing her family thrive. Then, her eyes found Amelia in the crowd, and her smile widened. "And I am most proud," she said, her voice swelling with emotion, "of my darling daughter, Amelia. This past year, she has shown a strength I always knew she possessed. She has made brave, bold decisions to secure a brighter future for herself and for my beautiful granddaughter, Chloe." The hypocrisy was so profound, so audacious, it was almost sublime. A wave of polite applause rippled through the room. Mark Thorne raised his glass in a toast to Amelia, a smirk playing on his lips. This was their victory lap. As the applause began to fade, Liam moved. He didn't rush. His steps were measured and deliberate as he walked from the edge of the room towards the podium. A murmur went through the crowd. Amelia's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Liam reached the podium and gently, but firmly, took the microphone from Margaret's hand. Her perfectly manicured fingers went slack with surprise. He turned to the crowd, his face calm, his voice steady and clear, amplified by the expensive sound system. "Thank you, Margaret. A beautiful sentiment," he began, his tone disarmingly polite. "Your words about family and bold decisions have truly inspired me, so much so that I've prepared a small tribute of my own. A short presentation to celebrate the family's incredible, and until now, very private, business successes." He gave the slightest of signals, a barely perceptible nod in Leo's direction. Across the room, a finger tapped a key on a laptop. The massive projection screen behind the podium, which had been displaying a tasteful, looping slideshow of Margaret's life, went black for a single, dramatic second. Then, a new image appeared. It was a stunning architectural photograph of the house Liam had built, glowing in the late afternoon Sunday. Below it, the elegant text read, "Home, a foundation of love and trust." A few people in the audience smiled at the sentimental gesture. Amelia and Margaret exchanged a look of relieved condescension. Then the slide changed. It was now a stark, clinical image of the deed of sale, with two signatures highlighted in bright red circles. Next to it, a sample of Liam's real signature appeared. A cold, synthesized female voice, devoid of all emotion, filled the silent room. Forensic analysis conclusion. There is conclusive evidence that the signature of Liam Carter was a conscious simulation or forgery. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The slide changed again, this time to a flowchart, a spiderweb of arrows and account numbers, tracing the exact path of the house payment from Horizon Properties LLC to the offshore account, and back to a joint savings account in the names of A. Carter and M. Thorne. The murmuring in the room grew louder, more urgent. Then came the photos. A rapid-fire sequence of Frank Miller's surveillance pictures flashed across the screen. The intimate lunch, the hand-holding, the kiss in the parking garage, the entrance to the condominium. The crowd was now completely silent, their eyes darting from the damning images on the screen to the frozen, horrified faces of Amelia and Mark. And then, the screen went black again. A profound silence fell, so complete that the clinking of a single ice cube in a glass sounded like a gunshot. Into that silence came a voice, amplified in perfect, crystal clarity. It was Margaret's. "Liam is a simple man, a stepping stone. Darling." The audio recording of their phone call played out for the entire room to hear. Every word of their conspiracy, every drop of their poisonous condescension, filled the air. "You've done the hard part. Don't lose your nerve now. It's for Chloe's own good," Amelia's voice pleaded, instantly followed by Margaret's chilling agreement. The final slide slammed onto the screen. It was the confidential redevelopment map of the North Ridge Commercial Corridor. His property was outlined in a pulsing red light. Below the map, two lines of text burned in white. Acquisition price, $550,000. Post, rezoning estimated value, $20 million. The presentation was over. The full, monstrous scale of their greed and betrayal hung in the air, undeniable and absolute. The silence was finally shattered by Mark Thorne, his face purple with rage. "This is slander. Lies," he bellowed, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the truth. His investors were already turning their backs on him, their faces masks of cold disgust. Friends who had embraced Margaret moments ago were now inching away as if she were contagious. Amelia stood as if turned to stone, silent tears carving tracks through her perfect makeup, her public life in ashes around her. And Margaret, the matriarch, the queen of this fallen kingdom, simply stared at the screen, her face a ghastly, bloodless white, her world having crumbled to dust in the space of 3 minutes. Liam stepped back to the podium and picked up the microphone one last time. He looked directly at Margaret, his voice as quiet and cold as the grave. "Happy birthday, Margaret." He set the microphone down with a soft thud, turned his back on the wreckage, and walked out of the ballroom without a second glance. The sounds of his enemy's social annihilation, the only applause he would ever need. Liam did not stay to watch the inferno he had ignited. As he walked out of the grand ballroom, the first wave of shouts and accusations was just beginning to swell behind him, but he closed the door on the chaos, shutting it out as completely as if it were happening in another country. His work was done. He drove home not to the House of Lies, but to a small, clean apartment he had secretly leased weeks before. A new nest for a new life. Chloe was there, sleeping soundly in a new bed, watched over by a trusted babysitter. As Liam stood in the quiet darkness of her room, listening to the soft, even rhythm of her breathing, the immense weight of the past few months began to lift. The tension that had held his spine rigid for so long finally eased. He had not brought vengeance to that party. He had brought truth. And in the quiet sanctuary of his daughter's new room, he felt the first, fragile stirring of peace. His phone began to vibrate incessantly. A frantic buzzing of calls and texts from unknown numbers, the shocked and scandalized guests, reporters who had already caught wind of the story, the frantic first attempts at contact from his enemies. He turned the device off and dropped it into a drawer. The noise of their world could no longer reach him. The dawn that followed brought with it a legal and social tsunami of catastrophic proportions. As the sun rose, David Chen was already in his office, executing the final phase of their plan. At precisely 9 a.m., a courier delivered a comprehensive civil lawsuit to the law firms representing Mark Thorne, Amelia Carter, and Margaret. The suit was a masterpiece of legal devastation, detailing counts of fraud, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and unjust enrichment, with the entire, explosive cache of evidence attached as exhibits. Simultaneously, David walked a complete copy of the evidence package into the district attorney's office, where it was accepted for immediate criminal review. The shockwaves were immediate and brutal. An emergency injunction was granted by a judge, freezing all known assets belonging to the three conspirators, including bank accounts, properties, and a portfolio of stocks Margaret had long bragged about. Mark Thorne's world imploded with astonishing speed. His primary investors, several of whom had been in the room to witness his public disgrace, called an emergency board meeting. By noon, they had invoked a morality clause in their partnership agreement, voting unanimously to oust him from his own company. Public statements were issued, severing all ties and condemning his fraudulent activities. His company, a house of cards built on reputation and leverage, collapsed within 48 hours. The Northridge Commercial Corridor project was dead before it was ever born, the confidential plan now evidence in a massive criminal investigation. For Margaret, the punishment was not financial but social, which to her was a fate worse than death. The story of the party became the single most explosive piece of gossip to ever rip through their affluent community. It was not just a story of infidelity and fraud, it was a drama of breathtaking hubris and public humiliation, and the elite of the town feasted on it. The friends who had once clamored for her invitations now crossed the street to avoid her. The charity boards she had chaired for decades requested her immediate resignation in curt, formal letters. Her membership at the exclusive country club was indefinitely suspended. She was a pariah, a social leper, trapped in the gilded cage of her mansion, which was no longer a symbol of her success, but a monument to her ruin. She had spent a lifetime meticulously building a flawless facade, and Liam, with one 30-minute presentation, had reduced it to rubble and ash. But Liam's most important battle was fought not in the court of public opinion, but in the quiet, sober chambers of family court. This was the fight for Chloe. Amelia, desperate and cornered, hired a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney who attempted to paint Liam's actions at the party as a sign of mental instability, of a man so consumed by vengeance he would traumatize his own child's family. It was a vile and desperate strategy, and it failed spectacularly. David simply presented the judge with the evidence, focusing on the audio recordings. The judge listened with a grim expression as Margaret and Amelia discussed Liam as a stepping stone and rationalized their conspiracy as being in Chloe's best interest, planning to cut her off from her father in pursuit of a wealthier life. The judge needed no further convincing. In a swift and decisive ruling, Liam was awarded sole legal and physical custody of Chloe. Amelia's access to her daughter was reduced to supervised visitation twice a month, contingent upon her undergoing a thorough psychological evaluation. Liam had built a firewall of law and truth around his daughter, protecting her from the toxic influence of the very people who should have been her staunchest protectors. This, more than any financial settlement or public victory, was the only win that truly mattered. In the end, he let the house go. While the fraudulent sale was legally voided, the property itself was a complicated and painful asset, the scene of the crime. It was tied up in the civil suit, a constant, painful reminder of the life that had been stolen from him. To pay his mounting legal fees and to make a clean break from the past, he agreed to have the house sold by a court-appointed receiver, with the proceeds to be held in escrow pending the final judgment of his lawsuit. He visited it one last time, walking through the empty rooms he had designed and built with so much love and hope. A wave of sadness washed over him, not for the woman he had lost, but for the dream that had died there. But as he stood in the great room, the afternoon sun pouring through the large picture window just as he had designed, he realized the truth. A home wasn't the wood, the stone, or the land. A home was a feeling of safety, of trust, of unconditional love. He had lost the building, but he had saved the home. He had saved it by taking Chloe and walking away. He closed the door for the last time, leaving the ghosts of his past behind, and walked out into the clean, clear air of his future, a free man at last. The months that followed the demolition were quiet. Liam and Chloe moved to a small, unassuming town 100 miles away, a place where the name Carter meant nothing, a blank slate on which they could build a new, smaller, but far more honest life. They lived in a rented house with a big backyard, and Liam found a quiet joy in the simple acts of fatherhood, helping Chloe with her math homework, teaching her how to ride her bike without training wheels, grilling burgers on a warm summer evening. He went back to work, taking on small, meaningful architectural projects that fed his soul rather than his ego. For the first time in a long time, he was not just surviving, he was healing. The legal battles had concluded with the grim finality of a gavel strike. Mark and Amelia were both convicted on multiple felony counts of fraud and forgery, their prison sentences a stark postscript to their story of greed. Margaret, though she avoided criminal charges, was left with nothing but her empty mansion and a legacy of public shame. Liam had won, but he felt no elation, only a profound sense of relief, the feeling of a man who had finally reached shore after a shipwreck. The civil suit was in its final stages, a matter of accountants and lawyers liquidating the frozen assets to satisfy the massive judgment awarded to Liam. The house, the beautiful, tainted house, had been sold, the proceeds held by the court. Liam believed all the chapters of that story were closed. But there was one final, astonishing postscript yet to be written. The call came from David on a crisp autumn afternoon. His voice was strange, a mixture of disbelief and giddy excitement. "Liam," he said, "are you sitting down? You remember that mandatory geological survey the court ordered on the property before the sale? The one we thought was just a waste of time?" Liam remembered. It was a bureaucratic formality, a box to be checked. "Well," David continued, a laugh bubbling up in his voice, "the results came in, and they are biblical." He explained that as part of the survey, the geologists had performed a series of core drills. Deep beneath the topsoil, under the very clay where the foundation of his house had rested, they found something impossible. A massive, incredibly dense vein of a mineral known as sodalite-rich syenite. Commercially, it had a much more glamorous name: luxury blue granite. It was one of the rarest and most sought-after ornamental stones on the planet. A deep, celestial blue swirled with veins of white, prized by the world's wealthiest for custom countertops, sculptures, and facades. The deposit under his former home was not only large but of an exceptionally pure grade. The initial conservative valuation of the quarrying rights was not in the thousands or even the low millions. The number the geologists had put in their report was just shy of $100 million. Liam was silent, the phone pressed to his ear, as he stared out the window at Chloe swinging on a tire swing he had just hung for her. The irony was so staggering, so profoundly perfect, it was almost poetic. It was the ultimate judgment of fate, a cosmic punchline to their pathetic, greedy story. Mark, Amelia, and Margaret, in their all-consuming avarice, had conspired, lied, and destroyed a family to steal a piece of land they believed was worth $20 million. They saw the world only in terms of zoning laws and profit margins. They had been standing on a king's ransom, a buried treasure of unimaginable value, and had been completely blind to it. In their rush to steal the treasure map, they had failed to notice that the entire island was made of gold. Because the fraudulent sale had been declared null and void by the courts, the full and legal title to the property and everything beneath it had reverted to its one true owner before the public sale was finalized. It all belonged to Liam. The sheer karmic perfection of it was almost too much to comprehend. Their greed had not only been their downfall, it had been the instrument of his salvation, delivering a fortune into his hands that they could never have dreamed of. Liam Carter did not become a mining baron. He had no desire for a life of extravagant wealth, the very thing that had corrupted the people who had hurt him. He authorized David to discreetly sell the mineral rights to a reputable and environmentally responsible firm. And with the immense proceeds, he did what the architect in him had always done. He built something strong, something lasting. He created an unshakable trust for Chloe, and for her children, and for their children after them, ensuring that his family would be secure for generations to come. He also established a significant charitable foundation in his name, dedicated to providing free legal resources for victims of domestic and financial fraud. He kept only a small fraction for himself, enough to buy a modest piece of land in his new town and build a small, beautiful, and honest house with his own 2 hands. His victory was never about money. It was about reclaiming his life, and now he could use his painful journey to help others reclaim theirs. Sometimes, he thought, as he watched his daughter play in the golden light of their new beginning, the foundation of your life must be shattered. The walls must be torn down and the ground ripped open. Because only then, in the wreckage, can you discover the unimaginable treasures hidden deep beneath the surface. And only then can you build something new, something real, on a foundation of truth. He had endured the fire, and he had learned the most important lesson of all. Never, ever underestimate the silence of a man who has endured too much. Liam Carter's story is over, but the quiet betrayals in families across the country continue every day. Join us next time as we uncover the secrets of a will that tore a family apart and a son who discovered his entire life was a lie.